Daniel Brown's, I had also come up with around 5 major stages of waking up. Again, some traditions have more, some of them have what are clearly sub-stages of these broader stages. But they're essentially recognizable for at least the past couple thousand years. That's a very clear developmental unfolding sequence. But that's extremely different from what the modern West has come up with as it has looked at human development. So what the modern West has come up with is what we call growing up. And that's because this doesn't work with taking identity and expanding it to ultimate supreme Godhead status or radical spiritual identity. This just takes a separate self sense, which the traditions would look at as a fallen self, as an illusory self. Nonetheless, it has relative reality. It is there. And they track the stages that this relative individual self goes through from the time it's born until it gets to at least the highest stages that developmental psychologists have found have evolved so far. And this is relatively recent, where the waking up stages go back, we said it, several thousand years. These growing up stages weren't really discovered until about 100, 150 years ago. But there are probably a couple dozen major models of this individual self-development. And again, if you put them all on a table and look at them all together, you can see some very broad similarities in the stages that they have proposed that human beings go through as they grow up as a relative, finite, conventional individual self. And if you look at these, some of the models, they basically have around 6 to 8 major stages of growth and development. These are clearly important stages, though, because you can look at them. Well, let me briefly footnote it by saying it looks like we don't just have, one single intelligence, which is measured by IQ. People like Howard Gardner and several developmental psychologists believe that we have multiple intelligences. And some think that there might be up to even around a dozen of them. They include things like cognitive intelligence, emotional intelligence, moral intelligence, mathematical intelligence, musical intelligence. But all of those individual lines of development or multiple intelligences, they all grow or develop through a series of stages of development. And again, there are different models on what those are, and there's some fairly heated theoretical arguments about who's right and who isn't. But again, there's a broad similarity. And if you look at, for example, just to reduce it to very simplified form, just so people can get a sense about what's happening, if you look at self-identity, we find that there are at least sort of 4 major stages that goes through. The earliest is called egocentric. It's what Carol Gilligan calls selfish. The next major stage, Gilligan called care, because the individual extends care from themselves to a group. And then we also call that ethnocentric. The individual's identity expands to a whole group of individuals. And then the third stage, Gilligan called universal care, and we call world-centric. It's an expansion from just a particular tribe, clan, nation, group, religion, to an identity with all of humanity. And then her highest stage she called integrated, and it's a variation of what we call integral stages of development. And those tend to just tend to integrate or unify all of the previous stages. Now, again, there are variations on those stages. If you look at Gebser's worldview stages, for example, he has archaic to magic to mythic to rational, pluralistic, and integral. And those are all archaic and magic are egocentric. Mythic is ethnocentric. Rational and pluralistic are world-centric. And integral is integral. So again, you can see a fair number of similarities there. Now, the point about mentioning these two major types of growth and development, one waking up and one growing up, is that there literally isn't a major system anywhere in the world, east or west, that's included both of those. Now, and that's really kind of shocking. Because on the one hand, you have essentially the only type of process, developmental process, growth process, that humans have ever found, that the ones that do it claim fairly unanimously that this is an access to ultimate truth. It's actually showing you an ultimate ground of all being. And you know that by directly experiencing it yourself. It's a direct, immediate apprehension. It's not a dogma. It's not a belief. It's not a myth. It's experienced in a peak or plateau experience in a first-person experiential fashion. And this can be checked and tested with entire groups of people that are undergoing that developmental process. The traditions themselves have maintained that this is a pathway to ultimate